In the middle of a small-town diner, laughter echoed where it should never have belonged. A police officer, smirking, arrogant, untouchable, poured scalding coffee over the head of a quiet, elderly black woman. She flinched, humiliated, coffee dripping down her face as onlookers froze in stunned silence. To them, she was just another target of cruelty, another life crushed under the weight of racism. But what no one knew, especially not that officer, was who she had raised. The story that unfolded after that moment would shake the very foundation of power, proving that dignity, legacy, and truth can burn brighter than hate. The diner was the kind of place where people came for comfort food and conversation. Old photographs of the town hung on the walls, the air smelled of fried bacon and fresh coffee, and booths filled with regulars created a rhythm of familiarity. But beneath the surface of that ordinary morning, something darker brewed. She walked in quietly, as she always did. Gray hair neatly combed, a simple beige blouse, her presence soft yet commanding. For years, she had lived in that town, carrying with her a strength that only those who endured injustice could understand. Most people overlooked her. She was polite, reserved, never caused trouble. To the officer sitting at the counter, she was invisible until she became his target. The officer was young, cocky, and convinced his badge gave him more than authority. It gave him power, or so he thought. His laughter was sharp, his cruelty louder than the clinking cups and silverware. When he approached her booth, no one expected what would follow. He sneered, holding a jug of steaming coffee. Then, in one swift motion, he poured it over her head. The diner went silent. Some gasped, others looked away. The woman sat frozen, dripping in humiliation, her hands trembling. She didn't shout. She didn't curse. She didn't fight back. To many, it looked like defeat. To the officer, it felt like victory. But what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that the woman he tried to break had raised someone who would soon change everything. Her silence wasn't weakness. It was the beginning of a storm. The days that followed should have buried the story. That's how it usually went. Racism in small towns was often brushed under the rug, disguised as discipline. Just a joke, or taken out of context. The officer laughed it off, his friends defended him, and the town's silence protected him. But this time was different. The incident spread beyond the diner's four walls. Someone had captured it on their phone, a grainy clip of the officer, pouring coffee, his laughter sharp, the woman shrinking in her seat. Within hours, it was online. Within days, it was everywhere. The town was divided. Some residents muttered excuses, claiming she must have provoked him. Others were horrified, ashamed of what they saw. For the woman, the humiliation lingered, but so did something else resolve. She didn't seek revenge, but she didn't retreat either. She carried herself with the same quiet dignity she always had, even as whispers followed her through grocery aisles and church pews. What no one knew was her history. This wasn't the first time she'd been targeted, and it wouldn't be the last. She had lived through segregation, survived insults that cut deeper than any wound, endured the weight of being dismissed, ignored, and underestimated. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was survival. And what the officer never considered was that she was not alone. At home, framed photographs lined her mantel. Among them was a son she had raised with discipline, compassion, and unshakable determination. A son who had left that small town to pursue justice in a world that didn't always welcome him. He was a lawyer, now a civil rights attorney, whose name was whispered in courtrooms and printed in headlines. When he heard what had happened to his mother, the quiet storm she carried erupted into something louder. For years, she had endured injustice so that he could fight it. Now, the fight had come home. The courtroom became the new battleground. For the first time, the officer sat not in authority, but under scrutiny. The video played on screens, the sound of his laughter echoing like a confession. The image of his hand pouring coffee over a defenseless woman burned into the minds of everyone watching. The son stood at the front, his voice steady and his arguments sharp. He didn't just speak about his mother. He spoke about every act of humiliation, every abuse of power, and every moment when silence was forced upon the voiceless. His words carried not just the weight of law, but the weight of history. The officer tried to smirk, tried to laugh it off, but his confidence faltered under the crushing evidence. Witnesses testified. Diners recounted the silence, the shock, the shame they felt for doing nothing. The town that once protected him now began to see him for what he was not: a defender of peace, but an abuser of power. The woman sat quietly in the courtroom, her presence stronger than any testimony. She didn't need to speak. Her dignity had already spoken louder than his cruelty ever could. When the verdict came, it wasn't just about one officer. It was about drawing a line where silence had lived for too long. The jury declared him guilty of abuse of power, assault, and violation of rights. His laughter had turned into chains of accountability. The courtroom erupted not with cheers, but with the heavy relief of long-awaited justice. The officer lost his badge, his power stripped away. But the story didn't end there. Across the country, the video continued to circulate, a reminder of both cruelty and courage. For some, it was just another news cycle, but for others, it was a turning point, a call to confront the everyday racism too often excused. The woman returned to her quiet life, not because she had been defeated, but because she had already won in ways most couldn't understand. She didn't need recognition, applause, or revenge. She had raised a son who carried her fight into rooms she could never enter. She had endured humiliation so that he and others like him could dismantle it. The town changed too, slowly, uncomfortably, but undeniably. Conversations that had long been avoided began to surface. The diner was no longer just a place for coffee and eggs. It became a reminder of what silence cost and what courage demanded. In the end, the woman's strength wasn't in raising her voice. It was in raising someone who could. And so, the question lingers. How many quiet women like her carry untold legacies, hidden battles, and silent victories? How many have endured humiliation so that others might rise? This story is not just about coffee poured in cruelty. It is about the resilience of the human spirit, the cost of silence, and the truth that no act of hate goes unseen. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room holds the loudest legacy.